In this lesson, I'm going to give you some advice for IELTS speaking part 3 of the test. But also at the end of this lesson, I'll give you a summary of advice for all 3 parts of the speaking test. So first, let's start with IELTS speaking part 3. You'll get between 3 and 6 questions in this part of the test, and you should try to give long, detailed answers. The examiner's listening to see if you can give good answers with lots of explanation, and it's also an opportunity to show how good your English language is. It's your final chance to impress the examiner, remember. So most people are tired by this time in the exam day, right at the end of the day. But you need to make one final effort to do well in speaking part 3 and impress the examiner. Leave a good impression at the end of the exam. So speaking part 3 can be a secret to just making that final improvement in your score, maybe getting the score you need if you do well in this part. We need a method to do well in speaking part 3, and I'm going to suggest that you follow 3 steps, or maybe 4. There's a 4th step that we can add. And if you follow these steps, you'll ensure that you've given a good, detailed, quite long answer. Force yourself to follow the steps, because otherwise, if you don't, your answers won't have direction. In part 3 of the speaking test, many people just give one answer, one idea, and they keep going round and round the same idea. They don't say anything new. They repeat themselves too much. If you follow a step-by-step structure in your answer will move forward. It won't go round and round repeating, so you'll have direction in your answer, which is what we want. Let's look at the steps now then. The first step, when the examiner asks you a question in part 3, is to answer that question directly. So you need to give an answer. Try and use a full sentence instead of just a one-word answer. Answer the question directly. Then explain your answer, give your reasons, give some detail. Ask yourself why in your head. Keep thinking why, and give more detail by answering that question why. Then move on to the third step. Give an example. Try to give a personal example, a real-life example. Talk about your country, your family, you yourself. Any type of example. Force yourself to say those 2 key words, for example. As soon as you say those 2 words, for example, your mind has to think quickly and give any example that comes into your head. You don't have time to plan. Just say those 2 words and do your best to give an example. And then finally, if you want to give an even longer answer, and if it's possible, the 4th step could be to explain the opposite or an alternative to your answer. And we can use an if sentence for this. What would happen if? You'll see an example of that in a moment. Let's look at an example of a question in speaking part 3 and my answer following the 4 steps. This comes from one of my blog lessons from IELTSsimon.com. So you may have seen this before, but I think it's a good example to use. Here's the question. Do you think that it's better to have clear aims for the future, or is it best to take each day as it comes? So this is an either-or question. Should we have clear aims for the future or live day by day? So what I'll do now is follow the steps. You'll see me follow the 4 steps to give a long, detailed answer. I'm not worrying too much about vocabulary or grammar. My main focus is on going through the steps and saying what I can. So step 1, answer the question directly. Here's my answer. I think it's best to have a good idea of what you want to do with your life, especially in terms of studies and career. So I'm saying I think it's better to have clear aims, a good idea of what you want to do. Now let's explain why. Step 2, explain your answer with reasons. Having aims allows you to plan what you need to do today and tomorrow in order to achieve longer-term objectives. So that's my simple reason. And step 3, the example of this. For example, if you want to become a doctor, you need to choose the right subjects at school, get the right exam results, and work hard at university. Simple example using a common career that many students are going for, a doctor. And notice that I use the 2 keywords for example. That forces me to give a real example of this. The final step is to give an alternative or opposite. So what if we didn't have a clear aim for the future? What would happen then? Without a clear aim, it would be impossible to take the necessary steps towards a career in medicine or any other profession. So that's my model answer for a good, long, detailed answer in part 3 of the speaking test. You don't need the 4th step, the opposite, for every question, for every answer, but it's nice to have it sometimes. The key is the first 3 steps. Give an answer, explain why, give an example. Now there's some good vocabulary in that answer and the grammar is correct, but I wasn't really focusing on vocabulary or grammar. My main focus is to answer the question well, to give a long answer that has good direction, that moves forward because I'm going through the steps. So let's make a note of what's important. My main focus is on my answer structure, following the steps, not on vocabulary or grammar. Why? Because my priority is to give a long, detailed answer. We don't really have time to think of good words or grammar, but hopefully if you're giving a long answer, it will contain some good vocabulary. You're forcing yourself to speak more, so hopefully you're going to use some good words, and your grammar focus should just be on not making mistakes. Don't have in your head complex structures that you're trying to use. If you're thinking about grammar, you're going to go away from the answer. Your priority, your focus should be on giving a good answer. To see more examples of Speaking Part 3 answers, do a Google search for my website and you'll find lots of examples there. Here's how to do a Google search that only searches my website, IELTSsimon.com. So put the search terms Speaking Part 3 and then the word site, IELTSsimon.com with no spaces between site, and IELTS. Just write it exactly as it is written here on this slide and you'll find the search results from my website only for all of my Speaking Part 3 lessons, and you can go through lots of lessons there, see more examples of how I answer using the 3 or 4 steps that I've shown you here. Now, moving on, let's summarize all 3 parts of the speaking test, the advice for all 3 parts. Let's start then with part 1, and my main advice for part 1 is this. Focus on fluency. Try not to hesitate, try to answer quickly, and use short, simple answers. We give an answer and we give a reason and stop. But your main focus is on fluency, trying to give an answer straight away. This part of the test is supposed to be easy, so give short, simple answers. In part 2, we have a different focus completely. We're focusing on good vocabulary ideas, so it's a vocabulary focus. We've looked at preparing for the 6 main topic areas. You can prepare really good vocabulary using themes and examples as I've shown in my lessons, and if you go into the exam with some good vocabulary prepared, that can really help your score. On the other hand, what we've just seen in this lesson, in part 3, we've got a different focus again. Focus on structure. Answer, explain, example, and maybe an alternative. This forces you, as I said, to give a longer answer with more detail, and that's the key thing in this part of the test. The only part of this test where we can really stop and think and prepare some ideas, some good vocabulary, is part 2. In parts 1 and 3, you don't have time to think, you don't have time to prepare, so it's best to focus on quick answers in part 1 and on this step-by-step structure in part 3. So that's my advice for the speaking test, and this is the last lesson. In the next lesson, we'll move on to IELTS listening.